8 items that FEMA will confiscate during an SHTF emergency. We're going to take a look at 8 different items, but we're also going to look at the basis for FEMA having the legal ability to be able to come in and confiscate. There's been a number of executive orders, there have been a number of laws that have been passed for national emergencies, whether it's man-made, whether it's a natural disaster, or it's even an attack. And obviously with the Cold War and the nuclear threats that happened back in the 50s, 60s, up until the 70s, there were a lot of laws that were in place to protect citizens and to make sure that our country continued. Of course, obviously with the civil defense program, it really involved individuals, citizens, people, the private sector. There were volunteer groups. There were funds that were allocated to help, whether it was Geiger counters or fallout shelters, and there was money to be handed out into different communities. But it was administered mainly by citizens working together. Back in really it started in the 60s with JFK. They started talking about federal emergency management, and so there were some executive orders that were put forward, and it really changed the face of taking away from the local communities and the volunteer network to more of a federal agency. It really took away individual rights for the collective rights, and that's where a lot of the hoarding laws that are coming in. And we're going to talk a little bit about that, and then we're going to go through the list. But I want to give you a background, because I'm not just putting this list down because I think this could happen. These are actually on the books. You can do the research. In fact, I'll have some of the links down below, or at least the executive order numbers, and also the anti-hoarding law. Of course, a lot of that had to do with COVID. Now, 50 U.S. Code 4512. These are anti-hoarding laws, and the section 4512 really spelled it out. Previous areas in this code talked about medical supplies, but one of the things that really came to roost was 4512. That if you have certain designated supplies in excess of what's reasonable and that what you're going to consume, whether it's home, business, or personal, they can be confiscated. Obviously, there's a lot of different facets to this, but it's very open-ended. So the problem is, we may have a natural disaster and everything's fine. You may not have your supplies confiscated. But if it gets into a real SHTF, where there is a national emergency and supplies are low, it gives them the right to come in and confiscate and to seize excess that you have. One of the things I want to mention here is FEMA actually recommends that you have at least 2 weeks of food at all times in your home, and also a certain list of supplies. Ready.gov is a great resource. We've talked about it before, but it's just for 2 weeks. So most preppers have well beyond a 2-week period. If you have a 2-week supply of food, you're typically, just having some supplies put back in case of a power outage or a hurricane or something like that. That's not really a prepper. But somebody that really sees the writing on the wall and they want to put back a really good supply of food because there could be major disruptions in the future, these could be deemed as being excessive and beyond reason. Now, there's no criteria for what's unreasonable, and so that would just remain to be seen. But obviously, if you have a year's supply of food, that's going to be a lot of food that you put back just for your family, when there could be people out there who are unprepared that have nothing. And so the logic here is to take that food and to spread it out. Again, we're going away from the individual rights to the collective rights. But this country was based on individual rights. Will it go against the law? Could be. But by the time it got through the courts, you wouldn't have the food and your family might not survive. Now, Executive Order 10998 was an executive order by President Kennedy, and it was based on food. So it gave a list of different type foods that the government was able to keep control of in case of a national emergency, especially a foreign attack by an adversary. Again, during the Cold War. This listed animal fats, it listed oils, vegetables, any kind of food, whether it was whatever process it was in. It could be raw materials all the way up to what they call vendable materials, which could be canned foods, boxed foods, things like that. But it also includes cotton, wool, flax fibers, hemp, and any kind of natural commodity that could be used. And so it really was a broad spectrum of pretty much all the different commodities that we have. And then Executive Order 10995, which covered communications. Now this was based on, public radio, different type radio stations, having an emergency broadcasting system. I mean, there was a lot that it entailed, but it did open up room for confiscation of ham radios or personal radios, whatever an emergency team needed. And that was one of the things that this is a lot based on, is at the whim of whoever is coming through to be ready to be able to confiscate anything they deem that's necessary. And then we had Executive Order 10997, which was for electrical power. It was for anything that generates power, substations, power plants, dams, hydroelectric dams. Of course, obviously, nuclear power plants. But it can also be brought down to your generator, to solar panels, to different things that can be utilized in an emergency situation and used by government agencies. But again, these are designed to restrict individuals and more toward the whole. And while that can seem like a really noble cause, it goes against everything our country was founded on. So number one is your food stores. If you have food in different forms, whether it's raw materials, whether it's canned food, boxed food, processed food, all of that is susceptible to being seized. Fertilizers, if you have any kind of tractors, any kind of farm equipment. In fact, one of the things about this executive order is that it would take the farming industry from beginning to end, even production facilities, of course, obviously equipment, and make sure that it was at least functioning, but it could be taken by the government to be able to continue food production. We saw a little bit about this during COVID when baby formula began to be purchased by the U.S. government and then handed out to illegal aliens. And this really kind of upset a lot of people, especially mothers that had babies when formula was hard to get. So not only could they confiscate your food, they could cut off production of essential items to give again to the whole. Water. Water has been managed by the federal government. In fact, any waterway now is under federal protection. It could be a small stream coming through your yard. And so having access to water. But if you have a lot of bottled water, if you have water stored in 50-gallon drums, and you have maybe rain catchment systems, different type systems where you can store water, these are vulnerable to seizures. One thing that I find is funny is in a lot of states, rain catchment systems are illegal, especially in the more arid states. This still takes away the independency from some people that live in those areas that want to protect and provide for their family. Number three is medical supplies, and that really got attacked during the COVID epidemic. Any kind of supplies that you have, whether it's hand sanitizers, masks, even protective gear, these can be confiscated if they're needed. Now, these laws, and I'll just say all these laws, are really based on an industry level. But according to how bad the situation gets, they can come down more to the personal level. Number four is power, and this really refers to our electrical power grid. But it can be brought down to personal generators, solar generators, or just solar panels, inverters that convert solar power that you can use in your home. Also batteries, especially large batteries that'll store solar power. And so anything that has to do with any type power is vulnerable to some of these executive orders and laws. Number five, fuels, whether it's gasoline, propane. Natural gas is not very easy to store, but anything that you have for fuel. It could even get to a place where it could be the wood that you have stored up for the winter. If it's cold enough and there are people that are in need, they could be confiscated. I think that may be a stretch, but still, all the different ways that you store different type fuels for energy are compromised and they can be vulnerable. It even gets down to coal, which is also listed, and a number of other solid fuels. It may not be something that we use on a regular basis, but all of those industries are going to be under the thumb of the federal government. Number six is communication, and obviously with radio stations and different modes, the internet, different sources on the internet, if we have power, they're going to be susceptible to at least control of some sort and be utilized by the federal government in a major emergency. But this can also come down to ham radios that you have. Maybe you have antennas, you have a ham shack, you have a lot of different things. Also just standard radios, GMRS or different kind that could be used by the federal government if there is a lack and if there is a need. And so all of these can be compromised. Number 7 is firearms or weapons. One of the things we saw during Katrina was when the mayor of New Orleans just decided to have martial law, and then police and FEMA and a group of different type law enforcement went around door to door collecting firearms. NRA did a big expose on that. I know that an elderly lady, probably in her 70s, had a revolver. And she was refusing to give up that revolver because she said she needed it to protect her home. And these big thugs went in and pretty much beat her to the ground and took the revolver away from her. That was a really sad experience to watch, but those kind of things can easily happen in an emergency. Boats that were going across, leaving their home, but getting to safety, were intercepted on the waterways, and firearms were confiscated en masse. And it was door to door. It was crazy. So don't think it can't happen again. And if there's a national outcry, or again, if there's a major emergencies, the logic is to take away the firearms. What's really great is a lot of states have enacted laws based on what happened in New Orleans to where even under martial law, they can't take your firearms. But it's according to what state you're in, what local municipality you're in, as far as confiscation of firearms. Number 8 is ammunition. Ammunition, if it's stored up and they feel like that's just too much, they can come door to door and take your ammunition. They may even leave you some if they don't confiscate your weapons, but ammunition definitely is vulnerable. The sad thing is there's many states that limit the amount of ammunition that you can purchase already, which is a backward way for you not to be able to store up ammunition in a time of crisis. So having ammunition stored back is one thing that a lot of people want to do, even to use it for barter and trade. But again, it is susceptible to seizures. Now, during the Civil War, a lot of armies were moving through hostile territory, could have even been moving through their own territory. And a lot of these armies needed sustenance. They needed to continue. They had to have food. They had foragers that went out to hunt, but it wasn't enough to keep the armies moving. So a lot of farms were completely stripped. A lot of their equipment and their tools were taken. And so a lot of people lost their way of living because of these armies coming through. Again, it's not for the individual, it's for the whole. And so they were vindicated to come through and to take whatever they wanted to. Some of them even just destroyed crops. But this is not something that's unprecedented. It's something that has happened in history before. And then when you take Stalin Russia, when he went into different areas of Russia and he just took all their food and then left them to die. It's really plausible in a really serious emergency that all the things on this list are vulnerable to being confiscated or seized. And again, it's not for the individual, but it's more for the whole. And to be honest with you, I think that we really should push to reinstate our civil defense program, where it takes away the power from the federal government and puts it back to our responsibility. And I think that that's really what preppers are all about, is taking the responsibility for their safety and for the welfare of their family, and they're preparing themselves. And to think that FEMA could come through, take all of your preps, and then you end up standing in line to just get a handful of the preps that you put back. It's a pretty sad situation. So what are some solutions? First off is to divide your preps. If you have a lot of food stored back, make sure that you put some in one area and have hidden areas where you can keep that food away. I wouldn't necessarily think about moving it at this point, but maybe if things start to ratchet up, take some of that food, leave it out in case you have a door-to-door search, which could or couldn't happen, but it is possible. And in that way, they get that food, and then you have the majority of your food stored back. And it goes with all of these different items, is to have hidden caches put back. You don't have to bury it in the ground, but you can just put it in other locations. You have a nice amount sitting out, and if they take it, well, it's better to lose some than to lose the whole. And that goes with firearms, ammunition, it goes with your fuel, it goes with all the different things, again, that are on this list. Another thing is not to brag about what you have. One of the things that can happen is people can rat out other people. Even on the code 4812, that's anti-hoarding laws, there are phone numbers that they list at the top where people can call and report people if that's, if they see that. So we want to make sure that you kind of keep it on the down low. The problem is, with most of us, we have an online footprint. We've been watching videos, we've been storing up food, we may have receipts. I would highly recommend maybe using cash more often to kind of keep, prying eyes from looking. A lot of times on the forums, we've seen it before in other areas, but sometimes federal agents are posing and watching and documenting different people that may be storing up and putting things back. But guys, to be honest, these 8 things are items that you have to survive. You need these items. And so, putting back and dividing it up is a smart move, but just being aware in case things start to go down that these items are going to be possibly wanted. And so you want to make sure that you're prudent and you take care of what you need to take care of. Guys, I'll have the list down below in the description. I'll also have the executive orders and some of the laws, and I'll have them at least named down at the bottom. So if you want to do your own research, you can. Guys, when it comes to fire, it is essential to survival, and having a good fire kit and knowing how to use it is vital for survival situations. And Exotac makes the best fire starters on the market. Made in the USA down in Winder, Georgia, using really high-grade aluminum. They machine some really beautiful handles, a lot of different features, replaceable ferro rods, and a number of other different fire starting tools. You get 20% off using Sootch 20 with the link down below in the description. And a big thank you to Exotac for sponsoring today's video. Be strong, be of good courage. God bless America. Long live the Republic. We have propane tanks with propane filled, or we even have, no. Very horrific incident was where an elderly able to, in case of especially a nuclear attack or some kind of, devastation or military devastation. Okay. Military devastation. What is that? What is that? I don't know.